Good morning and welcome to TheJournal.ie's Budget 2019 Facebook Live interview with Taoiseach Leo Varadkar. We're joined by the Taoiseach here in the Journal.ie offices and we'll be putting your questions to him today. We've been getting questions in since Tuesday's budget about what was in it and how it affected you. But it's not too late to get involved. If you still have a question that you want us to put to the Taoiseach, you can leave it in the comments section below and we'll do our best to get to it. Taoiseach, thanks so much for coming in. I know you've had a busy morning. I suppose I want to jump straight in. This budget has been described as some by a landlord's budget, one that was trying to give something to everybody, and even an election budget. Is it an election budget? And maybe just give us an outline of your thinking behind it and why you've touched on so many different aspects of it.
Yeah, well, it's not an election budget. I hope I'll have the privilege and opportunity to bring through at least one, if not two more budgets before we have an election. I think it's a budget that's actually very much in line with what has been our economic and social policy, our strategy, if you like, for the past couple of years. So it's bringing us down the deficit. You know, we had a financial crisis 10 years ago, a terrible recession, and ever since then we've been trying to reduce the deficit, and this is the budget which once and for all eliminates the deficit, so the government doesn't have to borrow next year and we can start paying down our debt, and that makes a lot of sense for reasons people understand. When your economy is going relatively well, when you have full employment, you should try and balance your books so that if you do need to borrow in the future, you have the capacity to do so. So it's very much in line with that. It's also been about putting money back in people's pockets. So this is the third year in a row in which we've been able to reduce the USC and income tax. I know it's small money. It's you know, for the average person, it might only be €5 a week or €10 a week, but when you take that over 3 budgets, that works out at €1,500 per household, and when you look at that, it's actually a lot of money. It's a month's rent or a month's mortgage, and also we've been doing the same with social welfare, restoring the cuts that were made to the benefits that people like carers, the disabled, lone parents, people with disabilities get, and they've now been fully reversed. And then the third theme, which we've really pushed on the last 2 or 3 years, is ramping up investment in infrastructure. So more money to build new housing, new roads, new schools, all of the things that we couldn't invest in because of the financial crisis for too long, but now at long last we're in a position to do so.
I suppose Seamus Coffey though has criticised it today to say that perhaps it is you know, not going to protect us against any sort of big failures in the future. What was your reaction, I suppose, to that today? Yeah,
I heard what you had to say. It was more critical than I expected it to be honest. What I'd say in response is that this is the first time in 10 years that we're balancing the books, and we will reduce our debt as a percentage of GDP, and spending is increasing by about 4%, and that's very much in line with the rate at which the economy is growing. I can only imagine what he would say about the other parties. Let's not forget that yesterday in the Dáil, Sinn Féin, Labour, all those left-wing parties and independents, they were saying we should have spent more and borrowed more and taxed more. So can you imagine where we'd be today if a government like that brought together a budget? We'd probably be seeing bond yields rising on the markets. We'd probably be seeing money being pulled out of the country. What we tried to do was get the balance right. We do need more spending in areas like housing and health. We did want to put money back in people's pockets, but we also wanted to make sure that we balanced the books too and got our debt down, and that's the balance we found. And
before we jump into the budget, which I'm very anxious to get because we got a lot of questions in, I just wanted to touch, I suppose, on the cervical check scandal. Gabriel Scally was there in the committee yesterday, and he said that perhaps more than 200 women could now be affected, and he seemed dissatisfied with the HSE's selection criteria for that overall review. What was your reaction, I suppose, to some of his words yesterday?
Yeah, I had a chance actually to meet him briefly yesterday and just thank him for the work that he's been doing, which has been really phenomenal. We're very grateful for the fact that he's spending so much time in Ireland helping us to get on top of this very difficult issue. We have known for quite some time, at least since May, that there could be more women affected. These, of course, aren't women who were part of the audit. We know that 220 women were part of the audit, but there are others who perhaps should have been audited but were not. And as I understand it, that's what he was referring to. I didn't actually hear exactly what he said. What we've done now is ask the Royal College of Obs and Gynae in Britain and the British Society of Cytopathologists to come into Ireland and offer any woman who's been diagnosed with cancer in the past, I think it's 10 years, the opportunity to have their case reviewed, to have all their old smear tests looked at again, and that offer is open to everyone.
And also today, I suppose you've been asked extensively about Denis Naughton and the McCourt meetings. I'm just cognizant, I suppose, on an earlier interview you said that, were you satisfied with the answers that Denis Naughton had given you? And you said, so far, yes. What did you mean by that in terms of, are you definitely satisfied with the answers, or what more do you need to hear today to ensure that you are?
Yeah, well, I had a chance to meet with Denis yesterday evening just to hear from him, his explanation as to what's been going on essentially, and he's going to go before the Dáil today and answer people's questions and further clarify his position. I think it's important to point out that, as Minister for Energy, as Minister for Communications, he does have to be able to interact with the head of the ESB and the head of Vodafone, and all of these companies were bidding as well, and he would have met with the chief executive officers in those companies. So in order to avoid any issues around contaminating the procurement process or so on, there was a protocol set up as to how you need to engage, and that's quite commonplace in government, is that if somebody's bidding for a contract or a tender, it's not that you can never meet them or never talk to them. That's impractical, particularly if you run into them in the course of your job every week. But there's a protocol as to how you engage with them if the contract is brought up, if you like.
And were you satisfied with those meetings? And I suppose it doesn't look great.
Well, I don't have all the information yet. I'm certainly satisfied with what he said to me last night at the meeting. But I just need to have a look at the communications protocol for myself, and need to hear from him if he's any further information to share with us. Great.
Well, you've loads of questions coming in since Tuesday's budget, so I just really want to fire away and get to those. I suppose the first one that came in from Paul Fahey. He said, why did people who do not work despite almost full employment here in Ireland get more financially from this budget than people who go to work and pay PAYE for these benefits? I suppose some questions about the €5 increase across the board for social welfare, while quite modest for the minimum wage.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's entirely true. Like, the minimum wage increase is it 25 or 30 cents? And that's per hour. So, that obviously adds up over the period of a week. But I think it's important when we do talk about people in social welfare, we understand who we're talking about. I know to some people, they think the vast majority of people on social welfare are unemployed. That's not true, actually. Most people, very few people are unemployed now, and those who are unemployed are often unemployed only for a few months. They just lost their jobs in the last couple of months, and they're in between jobs. So most people on social welfare are actually pensioners, people with disabilities, carers, widows, lone parents with young kids. And we felt it was appropriate that we should give them an increase of €5 again this year, because of rising cost of living and lots of different reasons people understand. And I don't think people would begrudge that. I can understand why some people, particularly on relatively low incomes, will do the budget calculator and see that they didn't get as much as that. But bear in mind, if somebody's working, there's a number of ways in which you can help them improve their financial position. One is through pay rises, and of course the budget provides for that, provides for pay rises across the public service, an extra pay rise for new entrants, and that's happening in the private sector as well. Then there are the reductions in USC and income tax, and then there's also other ways we're helping people too, by reducing the cost of medicines, by improving dramatically the childcare subsidies, so middle income families in particular will benefit from that, and also things like giving more people access to free GP care. I mean, you take all those things in the round, pay increases, tax cuts, reducing the cost of living, actually, when you take all that together, somebody who's working and earning benefits a lot more than
when you mentioned there USC, I suppose one question came in from Dermot Tabara, said the 9% VAT rate was seen as an emergency measure, and there's been a lot of criticism as to why that went back up, but he was sort of questioning why, if that was one emergency measure and the USC was also an emergency tax, why do we still have the USC if the emergency is over? And do you ever see a time when the USC will actually be gone, or is that here to stay?
Yeah, what we propose to do, and we'll do it over the course of a few budgets, is combine the USC with the PRSI. We have been reducing the USC consistently now for 3 years, taking the lowest paid out of the USC net altogether. So about 30% of people working and earning in Ireland don't pay the USC at all, because they're in very low incomes, and that's a good thing. And we've been reducing it in every budget. To eliminate it altogether, I think, would be very difficult. Bear in mind, we only just about balanced the books this year, and there are rising demands and needs to invest in our society, in housing, health, education, and we're doing that. So I think what we'll do is reduce it and then merge it in with PRSI, but to be able to abolish it altogether, I don't think that'll be possible. And it's not true to say that it was entirely just brought in as a recession tax, if you like. Bear in mind, we used to pay a health levy and an income levy, and all those long-standing income levies were just rolled into one and increased. Okay,
and I suppose housing, this has been dubbed as a housing budget by some, by Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, but you know, when you look at it, I suppose housing is a huge focus here for us in the Journal. We cover it extensively, and is there enough in it really for homeless and housing issues? You know, we have, you know, close to 10,000 people being homeless, over 3,000 children at this point. We're 3 budgets in. You know, were people expecting, I suppose, a big bang here and something, I suppose, throwing the kitchen sink at it, essentially? Why wasn't there, I suppose, more perhaps thinking outside the box in terms of the housing measures for this budget? Yeah, well, you know, it is of course more than a housing budget. There's a record allocation for health, an extra $1 billion for next year, a record allocation for housing or for education, for example. So increasing capitation in schools, building loads of new schools, more SNAs, 500 extra Gardaí next year. So it is a housing budget, but not just a housing budget. In terms of housing, it provides $2.3 billion. That's the biggest housing budget ever. What will that do? It's enough to take 5,000 adults and their kids out of homelessness. It's enough to provide an extra 10,000 social homes for people who are on the housing list. We're increasing resources for the RTB, so we'll be enforcing those rent caps a lot more tightly for people who are renting. That'll be in the residential tenancies bill. Is that a part of that?
Well, the money's in the budget, and that's to enforce the existing rules. And then we're going to bring in a new Bill of Rights to improve rights for people who are renting, to remove some of the loopholes that landlords are using to get around the rent cap. Do we know when about that? Because that's been talked about for a long time. We'd anticipate having that done by the end of the year. Okay. And another thing we'll do in that as well is a rent register, so people can see what other rents are being charged in the area they live in, if you like, and that will give more transparency around that. But to answer your question, is a very, very fair question. People always say, you know, there isn't enough in the budget on housing, and they'll also say, you know, throw the kitchen sink at it. I feel that in many ways we are doing that, but the only solution really is going to be increasing supply. We need to build about 35,000 new homes in Ireland every year. We've going up, probably hit about 20,000 this year in terms of new homes, 25 next year, and the year after. We are going in the right direction. If there was a magic potion I could use to make it possible for us to speed that up quicker, I would use it, but unfortunately there isn't, and you can't just scale up construction overnight. We're definitely going the right direction in terms of new builds. People can see it around my constituency in West Dublin. They can see it in South Meath. Just past Dolphin Estate on the way in here today. Yeah. That's being redeveloped. I'll be opening houses in Kildare. But I really wish we could do this quicker. But 10 years ago, our economy was destroyed. Our housing our construction industry was destroyed. Our local authorities lost the ability to do these things, and it's going to have to be ramped up. I just want to read, I suppose, some of the comments we're getting in. Emma Sheehan says, you're better off not working in this country. Kat Maloney says, why was there so much for landlords and very little for renters? And quite a few about that. Thomas Mullen says the budget did very little for the homeless, and Conor Byrne says Irish people are impossible to please. So I suppose touching on the housing again, we had one question in from one woman who said she was a single person and she wanted to get on the property ladder. She earns over 55,000. She can only get mortgage approval for about 200,000 here in Dublin, and she says, I earn above the threshold for affordable housing scheme. Rent for the next few years is going to be crazy rates with no opportunity to save. It's depressing, and I have been paying PAYE and tax since I was 16 years of age, and there's still no sight of my future getting any better. So just touching, I suppose, on the affordable housing scheme, what's in the budget for people like her? Yeah, well, first of all, I can totally understand where she's coming from. We've a lot of people now in the country who are kind of in a rent trap. They're stuck renting. They would love to be able to buy. In fact, they're probably paying more in rent than they would for a mortgage, but they've difficulty getting a deposit together, or there just aren't enough houses yet for people to buy. And we will get on top of that, but it's going to take a bit of time. In terms of the affordable housing scheme, the budget commits to over 3 years providing 6,000 houses under what's called an affordable housing scheme, and that means that essentially it's subsidised housing, that you will buy a house, but the local authority will own a proportion of the house, and you might be able to buy that out at a later point. We used to have those schemes in the past, and we now need to get them going again. Initially, the income limit is going to be under 50,000 for a single person, 90 for a couple, and we may raise that over time. But we want to make sure it works first. For the particular person you mentioned, one thing she should consider, she hasn't yet done it, is consider applying for the Rebuilding Ireland loan. And under that scheme, she may get a lower interest loan and be allowed to borrow a bigger amount, and that might provide a solution for her.
Just, I suppose, a lot of readers, including Aidan O'Mahony and Lorna Craddock, seem to be asking about the €1,000 increase for TDs got recently. What was the thinking behind that? Was it fair, given how small the increases that average people in the country got in the budget?
Yeah, well, just on a point of information, that doesn't apply to ministers. When we got elected as a government 2 years ago, as ministers, we all decided that we wouldn't take any pay increases or any pay restoration, that we would have a pay freeze for so long as this government lasts. It does apply to backbench TDs and the opposition, of course. And the way it works is their salary is pegged to salaries in the public service.
So it's the principal officers. And
yeah. So it's not that TDs have got a pay increase that anyone else in the public service hasn't got. It's what we're doing is restoring pay in the public service. I know
you had said it was sort of a matter. I think Pascal Donoghue might have said it was a matter for each TD whether they accepted that. Was there any thought in terms of maybe recommending that TDs don't be seen to be taking that? Yeah,
well, it's obviously a matter for any public servant as to whether they want to accept their pay restoration or not. But under the deal we have, any public servant earning less than 40,000 will have their basic pay fully restored by the end of this year, and any public servant under 80,000 will have their basic pay restored to what it was by 2020. So what essentially we do with TDs and senators is we say they shouldn't decide how much they're paid. It would be totally inappropriate for politicians to decide how much they're paid. So we peg their salaries to a particular grade in the civil service. And as their salary goes up, the TD salary goes up. When their salary gets cut, the TD's one goes down too.
And do you think they should take it?
I think the right thing to do is what we're doing, which is not to allow politicians to decide how much they get paid, to peg them to a particular grade in the public service. Because otherwise, you will get into a situation where politicians, for one reason or another, are deciding to give themselves a pay increase or a pay cut. The sensible thing to do is not to allow politicians to decide how much they're paid and peg it to a grade in the public service, and that's what we've done. And they're only getting that increase because other public servants are getting increases too.
And I suppose as well, there was some criticism here from Owen Kelly. He sent in a question to us saying that the 100% tax relief on renovations for landlords, this is going to be used too often. There will be more tenants evicted and less people able to afford to rent. So this is a landlord's budget, he says. Where's the relief for tenants who already are struggling? There's been a lot of calls, I suppose, for tax relief that used to be there back in the day for renters in terms of how much they pay. I know Sinn Féin have put forward that sort of offering, perhaps getting 1 month's rent back. What was the thinking behind the landlord's incentive? Because that's a common problem of people being told, well, I'm going to renovate my property, and the next thing it's either back up on the market or they're hiking up the rent for some other tenant that's coming in after them. Yeah,
I suppose there's two parts to that question. You're right to say Sinn Féin proposed that there should be an income tax cut for people who are renting, but nothing for anyone else. They didn't propose any income tax cuts or USC cuts for anyone else. We took the view that we wanted to spread it more fairly and give everyone paying the USC and the income tax a reduction. Now that might have meant we spread it more thinly, but it did mean that everyone got something, because renters are struggling to pay the rent, I get that, but there are also people who are struggling to pay the mortgage, and there are people struggling to pay childcare, and there are people who might be living with their parents and are struggling to build up a deposit. And Sinn Féin only, they do what they do. They pick one group and target them.
Well,
what they don't mention is they don't do anything.
Let's talk about what the government are doing rather than Sinn Féin.
So what the government did was to give a reduction in the USC and income tax to everyone rather than just one group. In terms of the landlord issue, that is just restoring the tax rules to the position that it was back a couple of years ago before the recession. And essentially what that's about, to put it in very simple terms, this is oversimplifying it, but perhaps this is a good way to explain it. Let's just say a landlord charges €1,000 a month in rent. That landlord is liable for income tax, USC and PRSI on that rent. So let's say after that the landlord gets €500. but the mortgage is 700 or 800 or 900 euros. So they're actually operating at a loss. And what's happening now is that now that house prices are rising again, a lot of landlords are just getting out. They're selling up and they're giving their tenants a notice to quit, and that's what's one of the things that's causing a rise in homelessness. But could there not have been perhaps a balance
between, as you said, the landlords? Was there no manoeuvre? You said it's too much money to put a rent cap or to put in any sort of tax relief. Was there just not the money there to look after landlords and also look after the tenants? Because, as you said, I suppose the Residential Tenancy Act isn't coming in now for, we've been talking about it for a long time. You said it's here by the end of the year. Meantime, people's rents are going up and landlords are breaking the RPZ rules. Yeah. They're only meant to go up by a certain percentage, and some of them are going way over that with little or no sanctions. Yeah,
the tax incentive that applies to landlords probably cost around 10, 11 million. So it's a fraction of the kind of money, for example, that we're putting into social housing, which is about getting people out of rented accommodation into a proper council house. There's the extra money for the RTB as well, which will help renters by enforcing those rent caps. So when you take a whole budget package of 3.4 billion euros, that's incentive for landlords is a very tiny part of that compared to what's being done for people in social housing list. 160 million for people who are homeless to get 5,000 people out of homelessness. So if you do it by money, it's a very small amount compared to what's being provided for social housing, or to help people pay the rent under HAP, for example. But on the landlord issue, the reason why we think that might help is it might get more landlords to actually not sell up. So I've met a few people in emergency accommodation, and you hear different stories, and every story is different. But one of the stories you hear is a landlord decided to sell up, and I was given my notice to quit, and I couldn't find anywhere, and that's how I ended up in emergency accommodation. We expect that because of this change, fewer landlords will sell up, and fewer people will then
some
get
of the
notice
landlords,
to quit.
I suppose some people might say, are these vulture funds that are coming in, and they tend to kick those tenants out when they get those properties off the mortgage holder. Was there ever any thought about perhaps putting some stop to that, because they own a lot of properties and seem to be evicting a lot of people when they want to sell out?
Well, that's in many ways that's puts your finger on this particular point, because this is really applying not to vulture funds. This is applying to, or investment funds, whatever you want to call them. This is applying to the average everyday landlords in Ireland, and that's somebody who's maybe one property or maybe two. So 70 or 80% of landlords in Ireland have only one or two properties, and half of them have a mortgage against that property. And this is designed so that more of them will actually stay in the rental market, because I know people like to demonise landlords, and there are bad landlords out there, but there are also good landlords too, and we do need landlords, because without landlords there's nowhere to rent.
Of course. And just a few comments, I suppose, coming in. Sarah Lowe says the working class are getting nothing. I get about €2 extra a week. Dolores Wogan says they're trying to keep everyone sweet for election that's coming. Is that the case? That was an uncomfortable laugh there, Taoiseach.
Well, I suppose it's the two sides of the coin there. One person saying they're getting nothing, and the other person saying that we're trying to keep everyone sweet. What we're trying to do here is get the balance right. First of all, balance the books, because that's the right thing to do. Set up a rainy day fund in case we run into trouble next year, or Brexit or some other reason. Put a bit of money back in people's pockets, but the big emphasis in this budget, the big money hasn't gone into the welfare increases or the pension increases, tax cuts. The big money has gone into public services. And an extra 500 million for education, extra capitation, more resources for your kids' school, an extra billion for healthcare, more resources for the NTPF to get those waiting times for operations down further, a big increase in spending on housing, providing an extra 10,000 social homes next year.
Well, I just want to touch on
off the housing list, but also will free up rental properties for other people.
I'm just cognizant of time, so I suppose a few questions that were coming in, and since the budget was the carbon tax. I sat in that room in August when you told us that you wanted to definitely do something in this budget on carbon tax. It would hit all the headlines. Everyone was expecting some sort of fuel hike or the rest of it, and it just didn't appear. So, what was the thing about that? One question says, why did you back down on the commitment to introduce carbon tax? Is this just a populist budget? You're too afraid to make tough political decisions, and where are we going to find the €600 million fine that we're going to have to pay out for missing our emissions targets?
Yeah, well, I'm not afraid to take tough decisions. I was a member of the government that actually introduced a carbon tax back in 2013, and we did it at a very tough time, in the middle of austerity when people's incomes were falling and taxes were rising, and we did it then. We brought it in. We took a particular decision this year not to increase it, really based on the fact that there has already been a very big increase this year in the price of petrol, the price of diesel. We're heading into winter, so a carbon tax would have affected the price of home heating oil, the price of electricity, the price of gas. And the whole idea of a carbon tax is it increases the price of those things.
But we're going to have to bite the bullet at some point. Is that not the case? And is it not the case that, I know there's a lot of talk about election, it doesn't look good to be walking into an election when people's bills are going up. Is that the case?
Well, they're going up already. So the question is, did we think it appropriate at this time, heading into winter, heading into Brexit, when those prices are going up already, to hit people almost with a double whammy by adding to the cost of them as well, would have totally wiped out the gains that people got in the budget through the tax cuts or the welfare increases. What I'd like us to do is to get an all-party consensus on a schedule for we've already introduced, but increasing the carbon tax to a certain figure by 2030, because what we've found in other countries is carbon taxes, a bit like water, become very political, and you've big campaigns against them, and you've people saying that it's going to start low but it's going to increase every year, and actually it will.
Was it a choice between VAT and carbon tax? Was there a sort of back and forth about that one?
It would have, like the VAT measure, bear in mind, was a temporary one, so it was always going to be reversed. That will bring in about 480 million in year one and 600 million in a full year. You would need a very big carbon tax increase to bring in that kind of money.
And was there any ever...
Think of people who are commuting, who are filling their tank with petrol or diesel. Think of older people who have to fill a tank in the next couple of months.
But we also have to think about our children in 10 or 15 years' time who won't have clean air to breathe.
Yeah, and when we have environmental measures, for example, in the budget, one thing we've done is to increase the VRT on newly bought diesel cars. I don't actually think putting diesel up by another 2 or 3 cents would have radically changed people's behaviour and improved the environment. Unfortunately, people would just have had to pay. However, what we did was increase the price of new diesel cars being bought or brought into the country, and the advantage of that is getting away from this mistaken idea, unfortunately, that diesel cars are better for the environment or are better for your health, when they're actually bad for your health.
We've gone a bit over time, but I just wanted to quickly ask about the VAT. One woman had asked why in other countries, I suppose, they have city tax on hotels. Was that ever a consideration? Because some of the smaller hoteliers have been on the radio saying that they were going to be hit quite hard by this.
Well, in other countries, they both. They have VAT, which goes to the national government to pay for everything that national government does, and they also have a city tax imposed by the local authority to pay for local improvements, improving the streets in the public realm. So it is open to local authorities if they want to impose a city tax, which then stays local and is often used to promote that city, through tourism ads overseas and so on.
Could it be a national measure, do you think?
To impose a city tax?
On a Dublin city or Cork or for large hoteliers?
No is a short answer. I think if city taxes are going to be imposed, they should be imposed by the cities. Like that's really a function, I think, of local government. What you couldn't have is different VAT rates in different counties, and I know people talk about that, but can you imagine how impractical it would be to have a VAT rate on a hotel just inside the Cavan border that's different to the VAT rate just inside the Meath border? It just wouldn't work.
Great. Well, we have a few more comments, I suppose. And a more positive comment. Colm Ali says, "Well done, Leo. I can't all be in one budget or even one term in government. People seem to have no patience with process." And then Kathy Kapla says, apparently have no interest outside of Dublin and no interest whatsoever in rural Ireland. Answer that.
I can only imagine what you'd say if we'd put up the diesel.
Yeah, true.
But no, I wouldn't accept that for a second. Extra 60 million for agriculture, giving farmers more payments, areas of natural constraint, and also a new beef scheme, which is environmentally orientated. An extra 60 million from Michael Ring's department, which is the Rural Affairs Department. So that's money from the Rural Fund for town and village renewal, for example. And of course, all those increases in spending on education, on healthcare, on housing, the reduced childcare costs, the reduced medicine costs, all those things that kick in the budget, they benefit rural people too. Bear in mind, lots of public servants live in rural areas as well. There's probably more public servants living in rural areas than there are farmers. They will benefit from the pay increases next year as well.
Great. Well, we have gone way over, I'm afraid. Sorry for keeping you so long. Taoiseach, thanks so much for your questions and all the comments and questions that we've got in throughout the week. From us here at The Journal, we hope you have a great day, and thanks again, Taoiseach, for coming in.
Thank you.